The sound of my own suitcase hitting the porch still echoes in my memory. Thud. That was the moment my son, my own flesh and blood, decided I no longer belonged in his home. Rain was falling, steady and cold, soaking the cardboard box that held the last pieces of my life. Family photos, a few clothes, and a little jewelry my late husband had given me. All of it reduced to suitcases and one soggy box. I just stood there, staring at the porch light flickering above me, trying to understand how the boy I raised had turned into a man who could throw his mother out like unwanted trash. It hadn't always been this way. After my husband died, I thought family would be my shelter. I had no savings, no home of my own, and I was still grieving. My son, James, said, "Mom, come stay with us until you figure things out." I believed him. For 3 months I lived in their house, helping with the kids, cooking meals, even using my small widow's check to pay for groceries. I thought I was holding us all together. But I guess I was wrong. That morning, Jessica, my daughter-in-law, stood with her arms folded across her chest, lips curled in that tight little smirk I had learned to dread. She was dressed sharp as always, makeup perfect, as if she had rehearsed this scene. "You're too set in your ways," she told me, her voice sharp and final. "You don't belong here." Her words sliced through me like a knife. Too set in my ways? I'd raised her husband alone after his father abandoned us. I'd worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. And now, after all that, I was a burden. I turned to James, waiting, hoping for him to defend me. For him to say, "She's my mother. She stays." But he just looked down, avoiding my eyes. His silence hurt worse than Jessica's cruelty. "Where am I supposed to go?" I whispered. My voice cracked, sounding smaller than I'd ever heard it. James shifted uncomfortably, then muttered, "You'll figure it out, Mom." And that was it. No hug, no apology, just a cold dismissal. He carried my suitcases to the porch, set them down like they were nothing more than bags of garbage. Behind him, I caught sight of my grandchildren, little Emma, barely 10, and Tony, only 8, peeking out from behind the curtain. Their big eyes were confused, searching my face for answers I couldn't give. They didn't say a word. Maybe Jessica had told them not to. Maybe they were just too scared. My heart broke as I raised a trembling hand to wave at them, but the curtain fell shut before I could. The rain picked up, drumming against the porch roof as if the sky itself was ashamed of what was happening. Jessica leaned against the doorway, her arms still crossed, and said with false sweetness, "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Harder? How much harder could it get than being tossed out by your own family? I bent down, picked up the box that was already soft from the rain, and felt the corners split. A framed photo slipped out, James as a boy, sitting on my lap, smiling. As I read him a story, that memory was now lying face down in a puddle. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to remind him of everything I had sacrificed for him. But no sound came out. Instead, I straightened my back, pulled my coat tighter, and walked down the steps. My shoes sank into the wet gravel, each step heavier than the last. A taxi pulled up at the curb, headlights glowing through the rain. I hadn't even called for one, Jessica had. She wanted me gone quickly, efficiently, like ripping off a bandage. I stood there for a moment, staring at the house I had once believed would be my safe place. Through the glowing windows, I could see them already moving on, as if I'd never been there. As if I'd been nothing more than an unwelcome guest. With shaking hands, I opened my purse and counted the bills inside. $847. That was it. My entire future, stuffed into a small leather wallet. The driver stepped out, his face hidden under a hood, and loaded my suitcases into the trunk. I climbed into the back seat, my coat damp, my heart heavier than those bags. As the car pulled away, I forced myself not to look back. Not because I was strong, because I was broken. Looking back would have shattered me. But as the rain streaked down the taxi window, mixing with my tears, a thought whispered in my mind. A whisper so quiet I almost didn't hear it. I had no idea this moment would one day be my fuel. The taxi ride that night felt endless. I sat in the back seat, staring out at the blurred city lights, wondering how my life had been reduced to this. A widow, homeless, rejected by the very people I gave my best years to. The driver tried to make small talk, but I couldn't even force a polite smile. My throat ached from holding back tears. When he pulled into the cracked parking lot of the Sunset Motel, I knew this wasn't just a stop. This was where I would have to survive. The glowing neon sign buzzed above me, half the letters burned out, so it only reads Sun Hotel. It looked as broken as I felt. Inside, the air smelled of cigarettes and cheap cleaner. The desk clerk, an older man with thinning hair, slid a key across the counter without a word. The key tag was chipped. The number 12 scratched into faded plastic. Room 12, my new home. When I opened the door, my chest sank. The carpet was worn thin, the bedspread patterned with stains, the air heavy and stale. A single lamp cast a weak yellow light across the room. There was no family, no warmth, no comfort, just four walls that smelled like despair. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching my purse with all $800 inside. That was my lifeline now. If I was careful, it might last a month, maybe two. After that, I didn't dare think about it. The first nights were the worst. I cried quietly, burying my face into the pillow so no one would hear. Every creak of the old pipes or footsteps outside my door made me jump. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, disoriented, reaching for sounds that weren't there. My husband snoring beside me, my grandchildren laughing downstairs. But all I heard was the hum of the broken air conditioner. Mornings brought no relief. I'd sit by the small window, watching people rush off to work or families loading their cars for school. My reflection in the glass looked like a stranger. Tired eyes, gray hair pulled back without care, shoulders slumped. I used to be strong. Now I felt invisible. One morning, as I walked to the diner across the street for a cheap cup of coffee, I noticed the motel clerk watching me. He must have seen the sadness written all over my face. "Rough time?" he asked gently. I tried to brush it off, but my voice cracked as I replied, "Something like that." He gave me an extra towel that day, slipping it across the counter. Like a secret act of kindness. "You're not like the usual guests," he said. "You'll figure it out." Those words stuck with me. Maybe I could figure it out. I forced myself into a routine. Every morning, I walked to the public library. It was the only place that felt safe. The air smelled of old paper, the chairs were soft, and most importantly, it had free internet. I sat at the computer for hours, scrolling through job listings, rewriting my RSUM, trying to remind myself that I had skills once, but at 60 years old, nobody was eager to hire me. I got used to rejection emails. Sometimes they didn't even bother to respond. I'd close the laptop with shaking hands, feeling smaller with each no. Still, I refused to give up. I told myself, "You've survived worse. You raised a child alone. You worked 3 jobs. You can survive this." The first time I landed an interview, I nearly ran back to the motel to iron my one decent blouse. The pay wasn't much, just part-time bookkeeping at a small shop, but the idea of earning money again gave me hope. At night, lying in the lumpy bed, I imagined what life could look like if I just held on. I whispered little promises to myself. "This isn't forever. You're not worthless. You'll rise again." The motel was no palace, but it became my proving ground. Each day I walked out that door, I was fighting back against the voice in my head that said I'd been thrown away for good, and little by little, I started to believe I could fight my way out, because even in that broken room, with nothing but $800 to my name, I realized something. Being discarded doesn't mean being finished. It just means you get to decide how to start over. When you've been pushed to rock bottom, even the smallest win can feel like a miracle. That's exactly how it felt the first time someone actually said yes to me. It was a gray Tuesday morning, the kind where the clouds hung so low it felt like the sky itself was pressing down on my shoulders. I'd already been turned down 5 times that week. My RSUM was wrinkled, my shoes worn, and my spirit was thin as paper. But I still walked into Mitchell's Garden Center with my head held as high as I could manage. Sarah Mitchell, the owner, was about my age, early 60s, with dirt under her fingernails and a sharp look in her eyes that told me she didn't waste time on nonsense. She glanced at my RSUM and then back at me. "You've done bookkeeping?" she asked. "For more than 20 years, I answered quickly. "My husband's old contracting business, every bill, every receipt, every payroll check, I had handled it all." She studied me for a moment, then sighed. "The pay isn't much, 15 an hour, part-time. You sure you want it?" I smiled, though my throat was tight. "When do I start?" That first paycheck, just $240, felt like a treasure chest. I remember holding it in my hands, tears stinging my eyes. For the first time in months, I wasn't just surviving on what was left in my purse. I was earning again. It wasn't about the money, it was about dignity. Slowly, the motel room started to change. I bought a second-hand coffee maker, a little plant for the window, and even hung up my few photos. They were simple touches, but they reminded me I wasn't gone yet. I was still here. And then came the discovery that would change everything. One afternoon, I was closing out the register when I saw Sarah wheeling out a cart of dying plants toward the dumpster. Dozens of them wilted, brown, some barely clinging to life. What's happening to those? I asked. They're unsellable. She shrugged. End of season. We just throw them out. I stared at the cart, my chest tightening. To her, they were worthless. To me, they looked familiar. Broken, discarded, forgotten, just like me. Could I take some? I asked quietly. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Take as many as you want. They'll just rot otherwise. That night, my motel room turned into a greenhouse. Pots covered the nightstand, the windowsill, even the bathroom counter. The air filled with damp soil and the faint scent of green trying to come back to life. I spent hours trimming dead leaves, watering carefully, whispering encouragement like they were children in my care. At first, it felt silly. But then, something magical happened. After a week, one plant, a scraggly fern, pushed out a new green shoot. I gasped, touching it gently like it was made of glass. My heart raced. If this little thing could come back after being tossed aside, maybe I could too. By February, I had revived more than half of them. Their leaves stretched toward the light, their colors richer and brighter. My tiny room was overflowing with life, and with every plant that stood tall again, I felt myself standing taller too. One evening, I carried a box of the healthiest ones back to Sarah. She nearly dropped her coffee when she saw them. These look better than when they were new, she said, eyes wide. Told you they weren't dead, I said with a grin I hadn't worn in years. Sarah bought every single one back at half price. $847, almost the exact amount I'd left my son's house with. I walked out of that garden center with my head high, clutching the money, whispering to myself, you're not worthless. You're starting over. For the first time since being thrown out, I felt something stir inside me. Not just survival, purpose. I wasn't just reviving plants. I was reviving myself. My motel room had become a jungle, and it was clear I couldn't stay there forever. Pots lined every surface, the air heavy with the smell of damp soil, and every time housekeeping came by, they looked at me like I was running some kind of strange operation. By the 8th month of living like that, I finally saved enough to move into a small studio apartment above Jep's Pizza. It wasn't glamorous. The walls were thin, the rent was $650 a month, and the smell of pepperoni drifted through the floorboards every night. But it was mine. For the first time in almost a year, I locked the door behind me and knew no one could throw me out. The apartment quickly transformed into something more than just a place to sleep. It became my little greenhouse. Every corner was filled with rescued plants, each one standing taller, greener, prouder, like they knew they'd been given a second chance. The neighbors noticed. Mrs. Chen from downstairs frowned whenever she saw me hauling pots up the narrow stairs. Too many plants, she muttered in her broken English, shaking her head. But I just smiled. She couldn't see it yet, but those plants weren't clutter, they were hope. As winter turned to spring, I carried dozens of revived plants back to Sarah's garden center. Customers snapped them up within days. The once dead flowers I'd nursed back were blooming in front yards across town. Soon, other shop owners began calling Sarah, asking about the woman who could bring anything back to life. It was strange, becoming known for something I had stumbled into by accident. But every time someone said, "You saved this," I felt a piece of myself heal. By the end of the second year, I wasn't just scraping by anymore, I was growing. I had contracts with 2 more garden centers. My studio apartment balcony sagged under the weight of potted plants, and Jep's Pizza parking lot looked like an unofficial nursery because I ran out of space inside. Jep didn't mind. He said the flowers made his shop look welcoming. He even joked that my begonias attracted more customers than his garlic bread. The money was still modest, but the meaning behind it was priceless. Every plant that came back to life reminded me, being discarded didn't mean being useless. Sometimes all it took was a little patience, a little care, and someone who refused to give up. And in that truth, I saw myself. One night, after a long day of hauling soil and watering trays, I sat on my tiny balcony with a cup of tea. The city lights blinked in the distance, and my hands were covered in dirt. But for the first time since the night my son had thrown my suitcase onto the porch, I felt proud, not of what I had lost, but of what I was building. I whispered into the cool air. They thought I'd rot. Instead, I bloomed. Those words stayed with me. They became my private mantra. Whenever doubt crept in, whenever I thought of James and Jessica's smug faces, I repeated it. They thought I'd rot. Instead, I bloomed. It was during that time that I stopped thinking of myself as broken. I started thinking of myself as planted. And plants, I had learned, don't die just because they're buried. They rise. That realization lit a fire in me. I wasn't just saving plants anymore. I was building something real, something that could last. A business, a future, a second life. I didn't know yet how big it could become, or how far it could take me, but I knew this much. I had roots now. Roots no one could rip out of the ground again. And from those ashes, I was going to grow stronger than anyone in my family could have ever imagined. By the start of my 3rd year, my little balcony and Jep's parking lot could no longer keep up. I had plants spilling out of windows, rows of pots stacked against the stairwell, and trays balanced on every surface inside. Neighbors complained, the landlord grumbled about water stains, and Mrs. Chen downstairs muttered that my plants were plotting a takeover. But I couldn't stop. What began as survival had become passion, and now it was becoming a business. That was when Sarah, my first employer and now friend, sat me down over coffee. She leaned across the table, eyes sharp as ever. "You need a facility," she said. "You can't run an empire out of a pizza shop balcony." The word empire made me laugh at first. Me, the woman who had once counted out quarters to buy instant noodles. But Sarah wasn't joking. "You've got something special," she said firmly. "Stop thinking small, think smart." Those words planted a new kind of seed inside me. A week later, I was introduced to Eleanor Rodriguez, a consultant at the Small Business Development Center. Eleanor was a force of nature, sleek bob haircut, quick speech, and eyes that saw straight through excuses. She listened to my story, looked at my books, and then said something that stunned me. "You're not in the plant business, Mrs. Williams. You're in the business of turning waste into profit. That's bigger than you think." Her confidence both thrilled and terrified me. For weeks, Eleanor guided me through something I had never imagined, writing a business plan. It was grueling. I stayed up late, scribbling numbers, trying to explain my process step by step. How to revive a plant, how long it took, how much profit each one could make. I nearly gave up 3 times. The paperwork felt endless, the questions too complex. But Eleanor pushed me. "Don't quit," she'd say. "You've survived worse than this." And she was right. I had. After 6 months of planning, I submitted my first loan application. Walking into that bank office, I felt like the world's biggest imposter. My hands trembled as I handed over the thick folder. The loan officer, a stiff man in a gray suit, flipped through my proposal with raised eyebrows. "Your projections seem optimistic," he said flatly. I looked him in the eye and answered. 3 years ago, I was living in a motel with less than $1,000. Last year, I turned $50,000 worth of dying plants into over $200,000 in revenue. I'd say my track record speaks for itself. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker in his eyes, not about me, but about underestimating me. 2 weeks later, I got the call. Approved. $150,000. More money than I had ever been responsible for in my life. When I signed those papers, my hands shook again. But this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from power. Within 6 months, I had leased a 5,000 square foot warehouse on the edge of town. My first 2 employees were local kids, young, overlooked, the kind of people others didn't believe in. I hired them because I recognized the look in their eyes. The look of someone just needing a chance. We named the business Phoenix Plant Recovery. The symbol fit perfectly because everything we touched had a chance to rise again. That first year in the warehouse was chaos. Mistakes happened daily. Some plants died despite our efforts. Deliveries got mixed up. We worked 18-hour days just to keep up. But slowly, systems formed. We tracked results, perfected soil mixes, built schedules for revival, and then the profits began to climb. By the end of year 3, I had contracts with 15 garden centers across 3 states. By year 5, Phoenix Plant Recovery wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. 47 licensed operators were using my process, turning unsellable into success stories. For the first time in my life, I was flying across the country to attend meetings with corporate executives. Men in suits who once would have dismissed me as just another tired old woman were now asking for my advice. I'll never forget one moment in particular. Standing in a Home Depot boardroom, the director of sustainability shook my hand and said, "Mrs. Williams, your process is exactly what this industry needs. You've changed the way we see waste." I smiled, remembering all the times I'd been told I was useless. Look at me now, I thought, but the best victories weren't measured in dollars. They were measured in people. Like Tommy, the 19-year-old I hired who had been written off as lazy. Turned out he had a natural gift for plant care, and now he was leading his own team. Or Sarah, my very first supporter who eventually retired and joined me as a licensed operator, her faith in me paying off in more ways than she'd ever expected. Every success, every contract, every new state we entered was proof that being discarded doesn't mean being worthless. James and Jessica had thrown me out like garbage. Now I was building an empire from what the world threw away. And while I was proud of the business, there was something deeper blooming inside me: independence, confidence, power. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving or even thriving, I was unstoppable, and I couldn't help but wonder how my family would react if they saw me now. Success didn't hit me like a drum roll. It came like morning light across a floor, inch by inch, until the room glowed. Contracts piled up. Operators learned my method. I woke with work I loved. Then, during a meeting, a simple truth rose. I could buy a house. Not just a house, a statement. I told my realtor the truth. I want land, privacy, a view, a place that says the storm is over. She drove me to the Harrison estate in Millbrook Heights. 12,000 square feet, 8 acres, a glass conservatory. When I stepped into that warm, bright room and heard leaves rustle under glass, I knew my plants could live there. I could live there. My new life could breathe there. The price would have scared the woman I used to be. It did not scare me now. I ran the numbers, slept on them, and called at 9. Cash offer, quick close. The seller accepted by lunch. 2 weeks later I stood under a chandelier. Movers crossed the marble. Their steps sounded like applause. My apartment furniture looked tiny in every room, and I loved that problem. It meant I had made it out. I walked the grounds at dusk, gravel cracking under my shoes, the sky turning peach. From the master window, streets lay like threads. The water tower a toy, the neighborhood where my son still lived softened by distance. I didn't feel cruel. I felt space. Space to think. Space to heal. The conservatory became my favorite room. Sun spilled through the panes and lit each leaf. I filled it with citrus, rosemary, and a long potting table. The air smelled like soil after rain. When I watered in the morning, mist kissed my cheeks and I remembered the motel. I did not shudder. I bowed my head. Pain had been the soil. This was the bloom. Neighbors rolled by, faces turning. The paper ran a brief. Local businesswoman buys historic Harrison estate. My phone buzzed with messages. Then Eleanor texted. Saw the news. You magnificent woman. Champagne? I answered. Tonight, we toasted on the terrace at sunset. Glasses rang. Crickets answered. How do you feel? She asked. I thought about the girl at 20, the widow at 60, the stranger in a motel mirror. I thought about the porch, the suitcases, the photo face down in a puddle. I lifted my glass toward the town, like I'm standing on my own ground. After she left, I wandered room to room, barefoot, touching door frames, tracing the banister opening and closing cabinets. I drew a bath and soaked until the past loosened its grip. Steam fogged the window. Down the hill, a siren wailed and faded. The house held its breath, patient with beginnings. I slept with the curtains open. The town lights blinked like forgiving stars. At dawn, the estate was quiet, rinsed with light. I brewed coffee in the chef's kitchen, copper pots shining, counters clean enough to mirror my face. I looked older than the day I was put out, but stronger. Lines like rivers, eyes with their own depth. Trucks arrived, rugs, books, chairs kind to the spine. I chose colors that felt like breathing. In the foyer, I placed a single blue chair, velvet and tall-backed, like a throne for a queen who didn't need a crown. Beside it I set one framed photo, James as a boy, dandelions in his fist, a grin missing 2 front teeth. I did not hide it. I honored it. That afternoon, the security team walked the grounds. Gates, cameras, a call box at the drive, not to keep love out, to keep lies out. Any names we should flag? The captain asked. I smiled. No list, I said. Only this. Invited guests. That evening I paced the driveway to the road and back. Wind moved through the trees like applause. I stopped at the top step and looked across all I had built: work, home, self. Revenge wasn't hot or cold. It was quiet. The steady warmth of a lamp you switch on and leave on. When the paper hit doorsteps the next morning, I made eggs, watered the lemon tree, and opened every blind. I did not wonder whether my family saw the headline. News runs fast in a small town. At 9:17 a.m., the gate camera chimed, and familiar faces filled the screen. I took one last sip of coffee and smiled. Of course, I said to the empty room. Right on time. The chime of the gate camera echoed through my mansion like a memory I wasn't ready to face. When I glanced at the screen and saw their faces, my stomach twisted. James, older now, gray at the temples, standing stiff, as if the polo shirt on his back could still hold his pride. Together, beside him, Jessica, all polished perfection, designer blazer, practiced smile, but her eyes gave her away, calculating. And behind them, to teenagers, my grandchildren, taller, older, strangers to me now, though I could still see shadows of the little ones who once peeked at me through curtains. 12 years of silence, broken not by a phone call, not by an apology, but by a knock on the gate of my new mansion. I didn't rush. I made them wait, the way they once made me wait for kindness that never came. My bare feet glided across heated marble floors, coffee cup still in my hand. When I finally opened the heavy door, I stayed behind the screen. Well, I said softly. James, Jessica, children I barely know. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? Mom. James's voice cracked on the word. He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. We saw the article about the house. We just wanted to congratulate you. I raised an eyebrow. How thoughtful. Congratulations delivered. Anything else? Jessica stepped forward, her fake warmth like perfume sprayed to strong. Maggie, we know things ended badly. We've had time to reflect. We realize we handled everything wrong back then. Handled everything wrong, I repeated slowly, tasting the words. Is that what we're calling it? The children shifted uncomfortably. Emma, 16 now, sharp like her mother but softer around the eyes, cleared her throat. Grandma Maggie, I barely remember you, but Mom and Dad said you used to make amazing chocolate chip cookies. Her innocent words cut deeper than any insult. She barely remembered me. 6 years of birthdays, school plays, first dances stolen from both of us. I did make good cookies, I whispered. My throat tightened. Then I looked back at Jessica, my voice sharpening. But you made sure she wouldn't get the chance to eat them. Mom, please, James interrupted. Can we come in? Can we talk? I studied their faces. James, fidgeting. Jessica, impatient behind her mask. The children, caught in the crossfire of lies. Finally, I stepped back. Since you're so eager for a family reunion, come in. I led them through the foyer, crystal chandelier sparkling above, marble floors reflecting their stunned faces. Their eyes darted from silk wallpaper to Persian rugs to the art hanging on my walls. I could practically hear Jessica calculating the square footage, the dollar signs. This place is incredible, Tony breathed, walking toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. Mom, look at the pool. Jessica's smile tightened. Certainly, spacious, much too big for one person. I sank into my velvet armchair, crossing my legs, watching them squirm. I find I like the space. Gives me room to breathe. James sat gingerly on the edge of the sofa, as if afraid to stain it. Mom, about what happened back then, we were under so much stress. Mortgage, jobs, 2 small kids. We didn't know what else to do. So the solution, I cut in, was to throw your widowed mother onto the street. Logical. Jessica's mask cracked. Her voice sharpened. You're twisting it. You were interfering with our parenting, undermining us. I laughed bitterly. By making breakfast? By teaching your children to say please and thank you. Silence. The ticking of the mantel clock filled the room. Tony frowned. Wait, what happened? Why is she saying you threw her out? Yeah, Emma added, eyes darting between me and her parents. Dad, you always told us Grandma moved to Florida, that she didn't want to see us anymore. The words hit me like a slap. My breath caught. They told you that? Both kids nodded. Sit down, I said firmly. It's time you heard the truth. James's face paled. Mom, don't know. They deserve honesty. I snapped. I told them everything. How I'd been widowed, how I moved in to help, how Jessica declared I didn't belong, and how James, the boy I raised alone, carried my suitcases to the porch. How I left with less than $900. Rain soaking the photo of him as a child, tears welled in Emma's eyes. Dad, is that true? James couldn't meet her gaze. Jessica tried to recover. That's one version, no, I interrupted. That's the only version. The children sat in silence, their faces pale with shock, and then I lowered the final hammer. James didn't just throw me out. He knew exactly where I was. He drove past that motel for 6 months and never stopped, never checked. He let me rot in a room that smelled of mildew while you'd played house. James's voice cracked. How do you? I know things, James, I said coldly. I know you lost your job months ago for falsifying reports. I know Jessica maxed out credit cards on spas and designer clothes. I know you're drowning in debt, facing foreclosure. That's why you're here. Not for love, not for reconciliation, for money. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Finally, Jessica snapped. Fine, yes, we need help. We thought maybe with all this space you might let us move in, temporarily. I stood slowly, smoothing my silk blouse, looking at them. The way they once looked at me like a burden. Let me understand, I said softly. You made me homeless, and now you want me to give you a home. Emma's voice shook. Dad, Mom, is that really why we came here? Jessica tried to speak, but Emma cut her off. You lied to us. About everything. About her. Tony stood too, his voice breaking. You said she abandoned us, but you abandoned her. My heart ached for them. They were children caught in the wreckage of their parents' pride. I looked at them gently. You are welcome here, anytime. But your parents? They'll need to prove they deserve a place in my life. Until then, I glanced at James and Jessica, my voice steady as steel. The gates will remain closed, and in that moment, power shifted. The ones who once held the keys to my life were now standing in my mansion, begging for a door I no longer needed to open. The day they walked out of my mansion, my heart should have been racing with anger, but it wasn't. It was calm, quiet, like the silence that comes after a long storm finally passes. James and Jessica left in a cloud of excuses, their words sharp and desperate. But Emma and Tony stayed behind. We sat together on the velvet sofa. 3 people bound not by lies anymore, but by truth. They wanted to know everything. About my childhood, about raising their father alone, about the motel room that smelled like mildew and despair. They listened with wide eyes, as if hearing the story of a stranger, not their grandmother. When they finally stood to leave, Emma hugged me first. It was awkward, but warm. We've missed 12 years, she whispered. But we don't have to miss 12 more. Tony promised they'd visit next weekend. I held them both tighter than I had ever held anything in my life. After they left, I sat alone in the conservatory. The plants glistened in the evening light, leaves reaching upward as if celebrating with me. That room had become my cathedral. Every bloom was proof. Discarded things can thrive again, and so could I. The days that followed were peaceful, though I knew James and Jessica were furious. They had expected me to open my doors, to save them like I always had. Instead, I let them sit in their own silence. Word traveled fast in our town. People whispered about the scene at my house, how the family reunion hadn't gone the way James and Jessica planned. For once, I didn't care about whispers. I had nothing left to prove. Instead of hiding, I leaned into the life I had built. Phoenix plant recovery was growing faster than ever, and with it came new opportunities. I hosted a charity event in the mansion's garden, raising money for single mothers starting over. As guests walked among the rows of lemon trees and orchids, I told my story carefully, but honestly, I was thrown away. I said into the microphone, my voice steady, but I wasn't garbage. I was compost. I was soil. And look what grew. The crowd rose to their feet. Applause thundered. But what struck me most was the look in people's eyes. Not pity, not curiosity, respect. Of course, James and Jessica heard about it. Word reached me through a neighbor that their house was on the brink of foreclosure. Jessica had been spotted at the grocery store using food stamps. James avoided eye contact whenever someone from town tried to speak to him. There was a time when I would have rushed in to fix it, written a check, taken them in, let history repeat itself. But not anymore. This wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries. And sometimes the greatest act of power is restraint. Emma and Tony began visiting regularly. They'd sit at my kitchen island, telling me about school, sports, college dreams. I baked them cookies, just like I had once promised. Each time they laughed, Each time they hugged me goodbye, I felt years of grief unravel. I had lost time, but I hadn't lost them. One afternoon, Emma asked quietly, "Do you think Dad will ever change?" I thought about it for a long moment. "People can," I said softly, "but only if they want to. The question is, does he?" She nodded, her eyes wiser than her years. The mansion became more than a home. It became a symbol, not of wealth, but of survival. I filled its halls with life plants, laughter, community. The woman who had once been left in the rain with nothing now held open doors for others, not because she had to, but because she chose to. Every time I walked past the blue velvet chair in the foyer, the one I placed beside James's childhood photo, I remembered both versions of him, the little boy who brought me dandelions and the man who put my suitcases on the porch. I loved the first. I pitied the second. But neither defined me anymore. I had defined myself. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, I stepped onto the balcony with a cup of tea. The lights of the town twinkled below. Somewhere down there, James and Jessica were grappling with their own mistakes. For years, their voices had been louder than mine, their judgment heavier. Now, silence was louder. My silence. My choice to close the gates and live without their approval. I lifted my cup to the fading sky and whispered, "The sweetest revenge isn't slamming the door. It's opening it only for the ones who deserve to walk through." The tea was warm. The air was still. My heart was steady. And for the first time in 12 years, I felt completely, quietly free.